Hey everyone, thank you for joining me for this ConnectED 2020 virtual talk. How amazing is this event? Talk about making a positive out of a negative. This is incredible to be a part of. My name is Rob Dunlop, and I'm an educator, technology consultant, and author of the book Strive for Happiness in Education. Two other roles I cherish in my life are that of being a husband and a father. So I thought I would start off telling you this near COVID dad fail that I had and why it's so important to me. It all started when I was online and this picture of this really nice looking above ground pool popped up. Now I don't have a pool and I was thinking about summer and everything being closed and how bored my kids were going to be and how hot it was going to be outside. And I started to think this was a good idea. And then, it was $100 off and I knew people would be wanting these. And, it was just such an impulse buy. I just bought it. And I hadn't thought too much about it other than the fact that, assembling it. And it said on the box, it said, it's easy. You just unfold it, construct it, fill it with water. And I was like, well, I can do that. Well, once I ordered it, I realized it wasn't that simple. All my neighbors started saying, you need sand. You need to put it on sand and level it off. So I went out and I got a yard of sand and I spent the afternoon back and forth with my wheelbarrow, putting this sand in my backyard and leveling it out. And then I put the pool on and get it all set up and I decided to take a break. And don't ask me why, but that is the point where I really read the instructions. I have no idea why I waited so long. And in the instructions, it says two things very clearly. One, do not put it on grass. Two, do not put it on sand. I'd actually put it on grass and sand. So I was so frustrated at that moment. I had this big, huge pool in my backyard, which I knew I was going to have to move. And I felt this anger and embarrassment, everything kind of building up on me. And so I remember eating dinner with the family and just staring at it the whole time. And as soon as dinner was over, I knew what I had to do. I had to level off another piece of my yard. And so I grab a shovel and I get out there. And it is hard work. I don't know if you've ever shoveled sideways to level something. It's extremely exhausting. And my daughter, I felt bad for her. She keeps coming out, giving me water because I'm dying, dripping a sweat. And she keeps saying, are you all right, Dad? Are you all right, Dad? And, I was trying to power through it. My wife finally comes up to me and says, you know what? You need to call it quits for the night. And she was right. So, we get the kids to bed, give them some kisses. And, I clean up a bit and I get out on the deck. And there's this thing I've been working on for the last 4 years where it's just about trying to own my perspective, trying to change perspective so I don't get caught up in that moment where I'm super frustrated and ruminating on things. So I got back out there and I took a couple of deep breaths and I really thought about the situation. I thought, well, how can I turn this into a positive? And at the beginning it seemed hard, but then I got it and I was super excited. Came up with this idea. What about if the next day I had a pool and a beach? And it was insane. As soon as I thought about it, I started smiling. And my wife comes out and I'm all excited and she's like, whoa, that was a quick change in mood. And I was like, listen, tell her what I'm going to do the next day. I wake up nice and early the next day. I grab my shovel. I level it all off. I get the pool there and I start filling it up. And by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we were having a beach day. And I can guarantee this, when my kids look back on COVID or potentially even their entire childhood, that will be one day that we remember is just sitting out on our own beach, filling up the pool and playing in that water. It was an amazing moment. And I think what I'm most proud of in that moment is the fact that I was able to find the positive reality. Now, this is something I've struggled with in my career many times, is that, it's that owning my perspective thing. I'll give you an example. So this is my happiness timeline. And this is actually an activity that I put in my book, and I do it when I'm running workshops, is the idea of like tracking your happiness throughout the course of your life or your career and really analyzing it. It's really powerful. And when you look at mine, that's mine right there. And I know you're looking at that thinking, look at how deep those valleys are. I can't believe this is the guy that is going to talk to us about happiness and education. But there's something really important about this. In my favorite book by Spencer Johnson called Peaks and Valleys, he talks about how we really need to appreciate and savor when we're on peaks. But then he goes on to say, it's super important that we're in those valleys. How do we manage them? What lessons do we learn? How are we willing to change within those valleys? That's what is going to lead us onto more peaks in our lives. So what I thought I'd do is quickly go through 3 main valleys I've had in my career and talk to you about the lessons I learned. This first valley was one where, I was in teaching for a bunch of years and I started to get all my lessons and units and plan, and I started to reuse them year after year. And, it's just started to take away my love of teaching. I still love the kids. I still love coming to school, but just the pedagogy part was kind of losing it for me. And in that valley, I learned that that idea of complacency or not pushing myself actually has a negative impact on how much I actually enjoy coming to school each day. And also, not only that, the impact that I was going to have. Now, I just want to jump right to it because I know you're probably looking at this valley and thinking to yourself, wow, what happened in that one? So this was actually the lowest point of my career. And what ended up happening was that I had a lot going on in my personal life at this time too, but my admin were looking to make some changes to my scheduling. And, I was very entitled to what I was teaching and how I was teaching it at that point. And I didn't want to make changes. And that kind of snowballed out of control on us. And it got to the point where I was sitting in an office and they told me they were going to have to immediately administratively transfer me. So they closed the door and we were waiting for our superintendent to come. And I remember just being so fueled with anger and frustration that thinking to myself, fine, like move me wherever you're going to move me. I don't care. I'm just going to go there and shut it down and count my days to retirement. I'm actually really embarrassed about the way I thought in that moment because, I got this really sick feeling in my stomach and thought to myself, well, that's not the reason I got into education. I got into education to have this impact and to have this really fulfilling career, and shutting down and counting days to retirement was not going to get me there. So after a couple of minutes, I called my admin back in and I apologized. And we had this really great conversation. And it was really the first time in a long time with them that I was actually opening to listening to their perspective. I was open to change. I was open to, seeing things in a different way. And it actually, at the end of it, really worked out. My admin gave me some more leadership within the school around technology. That led to some board-wide roles, distributing technology and working with teachers, which eventually led to my current role, which is technology consultant. And when I look back at that moment in that office, it's really been pivotal in the rest of my career, because I remember looking back thinking all the time, I don't want to feel like that again. I don't want to go through that again. And so I began to think about things like, how do I stay motivated in my career? And at some point that took a pivot and I started to think about, well, it's not really motivation. It's more of how do I stay happy? So I started reading about positive psychology and happiness at work. And that is really what planted the seeds for me writing my book and doing the talks I do, is that I just want to love coming to work every day. I just want to be passionate about work and passionate about education. And I want that passion to drive the impact that I'm going to have. And at the top of that next peak, I remember, being at a conference and showing this timeline, and people were saying like, well, how do you see your timeline going? And I just thought it was going to go gradually up. I hadn't thought of the fact that, it would go down again. I'd be in the valleys. And, 3 months later, I find myself in one of the deepest valleys I've been in my career. And it's not really important what happened, but at the beginning of the school year, I felt disrespected. And because I felt disrespected, I developed this really negative perspective. And then I was latching on to things that were negative, and I was beginning to become negative and to become toxic. And it was a really tough point in my career. And I got so frustrated and angry that I ended up being 2 signatures away for leaving education completely. I was going to go off and work for an ed tech company. And I realized at one point is that that wasn't what was going to make me happy. It was I needed to make some changes in my life, because I knew I loved education. I knew I loved being around teachers. I knew I loved being around students. So I needed to figure out how to make this work. And thankfully for my wife, she came home one day from the library and says, I think you should read this book. And she hands me this book called Before Happiness by Shawn Achor. And Shawn Achor was one of my favorite authors. So I said, yeah, I'll give it a go. And I read this book, and within the first couple of chapters, he totally changed the way I saw the world. What he was talking about was the idea of how subjective reality is. And I'd never really thought of reality as being subjective. I just thought of reality as what's happening to me in that moment. And in that moment, I felt disrespected, I felt undervalued, and I had created this whole story around that I was telling myself every single day. And within this chapter, he goes on to say that successful, happy people can see multiple realities of the exact same situation. And that was a lot to take in. I remember reading that at night and not being able to fully process it. I went to bed that night and woke up the next day and looked out my back window and my eyes welled with tears because I had this flush of gratitude come over me. And I think what happened was for like 3-4 months in a row, I couldn't see anything positive. All I kept saying to myself is I should never have left the classroom. You know, I wasted 3 or 4 years of my career. I didn't see myself recovering from this. And, you know, I just wanted out. And that moment when I woke up that day and I was looking out my back windows, all of these positives started coming back to me. The fact that I developed all these skills. I'd started the process of writing a book. You know, I worked with some of my best friends that I'm still amazing friends with today that were right on my team. You know, the fact is that I was having an impact in the board and there was a lot of great things going on at that time, but I just wasn't able to see them. I kind of, you know, really at that moment realized it was a perspective thing. It was what I was choosing to focus on. And I now have come to the realization that it's that I can choose what I'm going to focus on and create a reality around that, similar to what I did with the pool. Now, you know, if I was to put it into an analogy, how that morning felt to me is like looking out that window, it felt like I put on a pair of glasses and was able to see things clear again. And in my book, I actually do this thing where I talk about how the process of getting glasses is very similar to the process of finding happiness. Or not, you never actually find happiness, but working towards happiness. And this is how I see it. So when you get glasses, something happens. You get a card in the mail. You might get an email that says you need to go to the eye doctors. And when you go to the eye doctors, they put you in front of this machine called a phoropter. And in this machine, you look through these lenses and they put up an eye chart and they, on purpose, started off blurry. But then they start to change the lenses and ask you if things are getting better and worse. And as you say better, they get it clearer and clearer and clearer till the point that it's completely clear. So if you're looking to see what this says right here, it says teaching is the best career if you can see it that way. And I truly believe it, but it's something you got to, you know, be able to see. It's something you got to be able to believe. It's a perspective you have to have if you want that saying to come true. So here's how I believe these two things are so parallel. When we get glasses, it's all about that check-in. And that's why in my book and that's why in my talks, I ask people to quantify how happy are you between 0 and 10? Or do an activity like doing the happiness timeline to really get you reflecting and thinking on where you've been in your career and where you're currently at. I think those check-ins are so important because they make us aware. Very similar to how your vision can slowly deteriorate over time to the point you don't even realize it. I feel like that can happen with regards to happiness and passion and education, is one day you just wake up and realize that you're not that happy anymore. And so if we're constantly aware and constantly checking in, we can make those changes and we can make those adjustments. And when we make those adjustments, we have to ask ourselves, are things getting better or worse? When we're trying different things and things are getting better, we need to add them to our daily routines and habits and build on that. And then at the end of it, you know, when you get your glasses, they're prescription, they're unique to your eyes. I feel the same with regards to a happiness prescription. I would love more than anything to be up here being the guy that can tell you how to be happier in education, but I don't really feel like it's the case. I feel like it's something you have to work on. It's a journey you have to go down. It starts with awareness, then it transfers into, you know, making happiness a priority in your life and being willing to make those adjustments and changes to help you achieve more fulfillment and more impact and all those great things that we set out to do in education. So I want to show you this really great video. And in this video, it talks about 2 things that teachers need most. So enjoy it and we'll talk about it once it's done.
I will never forget that cup of coffee. Well, a couple years ago, I was traveling when my schedule worked out on Christmas Eve. I thought the airport was going to be a zoo, so I got there a couple hours early. It wasn't crowded at all, so for me, that means coffee. So I get down into my terminal D, and I see the sign, I get in line, and so it's my turn to order. And I was greeted with this very warm and sincere welcome. This woman said to me, "Hi, my name's Lily. What's your name?" I said, "I'm Ryan." She said, "Ryan, what can I make for you today?" I said, "Well, I want a grande pumpkin spice latte." She said, "You want whipped cream on that, don't you?" I said, yeah, I want the whipped cream. She said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do." She said, "I'm going to make it extra hot, load it up with whipped cream, sprinkle a little nutmeg on top. You're going to love it." I said, "Sounds great." She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Cleveland." She said, "Are you going back to Cleveland to spend a holiday with your family?" I said, "Yes." Now, at this point, I start looking around for the camera, right? I mean, I'm trying to get a latte. So I move down the line, and the conversation continues, and she's funny. She's asking me questions about my family and our holiday traditions. She's laughing, and I'm laughing, and she hands me my drink and says to me, "Ryan, have a safe trip back to Cleveland. Go create some extraordinary memories with your family. When you come back through the Minneapolis airport, I want you to stop here and tell me all about it." As I get my drink, I start walking away, and I stop and I look back at this woman, and I think to myself, it's Christmas Eve. Most people would rather be anywhere else in the world than serving coffee in an airport. Not her. It was like she was meant to be there. And I couldn't help myself. I had to go back. So I did. I walked back and I said, "Excuse me, Lily." And she jumps around. "Ryan, is everything okay with the latte?" I said, "No." I said, "The latte is perfect. I just had to come back and ask you, what is your secret to making such meaningful connections over serving coffee?" Well, she corrected me. She said, "Ryan, I'm not serving coffee. I'm pouring happiness into people's lives." I said, "You're pouring what?" She wants to be happy in her life. She wants to be around happy people. So she chooses, even on Christmas Eve, to smile, to have fun, to help people, to just be happy. It's interesting. When I met Lily, and she would have had no way of knowing this, but I was pretty heavy in the heart and had a lot on my mind. About 3 months before that holiday, I got a call from Mom. We got some really tough medical news about Dad. And it was a terminal diagnosis, and we knew we probably weren't going to have a lot of time. So I was sitting in that airport on Christmas Eve, not in the best place in the world. I will never forget that cup of coffee.
I really enjoy that video, and I hope you did as well. You see, it talks about two things that I believe educators need the most of daily: coffee and happiness. And the great news is we have control over both. You see, there's a lot of research in positive psychology that says that we have substantial control over our happiness. Check out this study. It says that 50% of our happiness is determined by genetics. Now, for some of you, that might not be good news, but here is the good news: that only 10% of our happiness is determined by circumstance, what actually happens. I thought that number seemed low till I saw this number. It said that 40% of our happiness is determined by stuff we control and the decisions we make. And this made a total sense to me as I reflect back on my career, the toughest times and the deepest valleys and the most unhappy I've been. It wasn't so much what happened to me, it's how I chose to handle that. It's every decision I made after it happened that had the greatest impact. And when I went out to write my book, the driving force was really, I wanted to help teachers seize and capture as much of that 40% of their happiness in education as possible. And not only is happiness is within our control, it's also very powerful. Check out these statistics on happy employees. They say happy employees are 31% more productive. Can you imagine if you were 31% more productive, how much time you would have to do things you love, to practice self-care, to do things you were passionate about? Another statistic is they say that happy employees are 37% higher in sales. And I know in education we think higher in sales it's like Scholastic and selling school lunches, but what if we said 37% more student buy-in? How powerful would that be, and how much of an impact would you have? They say that happy employees are 23% higher amount of energy. Like, what if we had 23% more energy? I look back at the low points in my career and I was always tired and feeling worn out. Now that I've made happiness a priority in my life, I have an abundance of energy and I get to do all these things I've always wanted to do. And the last one is happy employees are 3 times more creative. And there's no point in history than right now that we need to be creative, with COVID, and, we're being forced to innovate and change the way we practice. And, we need to be creative. If we really want to do what's best for our students, we need to tap into that. And I believe that it starts with happiness. Here's a little interesting thing that happened when I was laying out my book. So my book's called Strive for Happiness in Education, and Strive is actually an acronym that stands for Students, Team, Routines, Innovate, Viability, and Extraordinary. So when I started writing it, the chapters on students were around 25 pages, chapters on teams were around 25 pages, but when I got to the chapters on routines, I realized I wasn't going to be able to put it in anywhere near 25 pages. So I phoned my publisher and I said, listen, I can't do that. It's going to be a lot more than that. I said, is that a problem? She goes, is it that important to you? And I said, I really believe that routines are that important. Then she says, well, go with it. So if you look at my book, the routines part is actually over 100 pages. And why it turned out that way is I believe that that's what's really important, is how do we make this a part of our everyday? How do we embed that into our habits and routines so that it sticks? And that was really, it was really a moment where I realized that it's that important. I want to show this quote I read in a book a couple months ago, and it says, winners and losers have the same goals. And at first I thought it was a little abrupt, but then I read the next sentence. It says, but champions have the best systems. And it really makes sense, is that we all have goals and we all want to achieve things, but it's our systems, it's our habits, it's our routines that will allow us to get there. And what really pushed my thinking and what really excited me about this book by James Clear called Atomic Habits is when he started talking about the 3 phases of behavior change. And he says that behavior change starts with an outcome. What do we want to get out of it? So we pick a goal. So for instance, in this case, it would be potentially running a marathon. But he says then to get to the next phase, we have to look at the process. Well, how do we make that happen? What systems do we put into place? What routines do we build into our lives to allow us to accomplish that goal? But where I thought it was really powerful is when he talked about the 3rd phase of behavior change, and he says it's when it becomes part of your identity. And this is when it becomes really, really powerful. So it becomes part of your self-image. It becomes part of your beliefs. It becomes part of the way you see the world. And one thing I thought he said, which really pushed my thinking and really got me going, was he said that too often we start off and we just are very outcome-based in terms of what do we want to achieve. And he says we need to think of it as who do we want to be? Who do we want to be? Who do we want to be as an educator? Who do we want to be as a family person? Who is it that we want to be? And if we work towards who we want to be, we're going to continue it. If we just look at it as outcomes, we'll run the marathon, then potentially stop running. But if we believe that our identity is that we're a runner, we're going to continue and keep it up. I think it was a really powerful thought. One thing that has become part of my identity is the idea of level 4. And what happened with this is, I was at a cottage with my buddy Neil. We were playing some chess, and he always would ask me all these questions about education. And we were talking about how do you mark kids nowadays? And I talked about the idea of a rubric, and I explained to him like a level 1 is like you're way below the expectations, but a level 4, you've went above and beyond the expectations that were set for you. And I don't know why, but it stuck. Like 20 years ago, this stuck, and we still use it to this day in all of our conversations. And level 4 became to us about how do we go above and beyond the expectation. So he would do something like make a great video for his grandmother, and I'd say, wow, that was level 4. Or I would do something for my students in the classroom, and he'd say, Rob, that was really level 4. But over time, it started to become part of our identities. And it wasn't so much about saying it to each other at one point. It was like level 4 became about myself. It's like, how do I take this above and beyond my own expectations? If I'm being honest with you, that's why I'm green screening this today and trying to be this weatherman, because that's what I find exciting. I find it exciting to go one above what I've done the last time. And that's where I find happiness. And, Tony Robbins has this really awesome quote. It says, progress equals happiness. And I totally think he's right. When I look back on my career and I look at all those moments where I was pushing myself and I was, breaking barriers for myself that I was super proud of myself, those were really my happiest moments. And I think it's something we need to think about, that our happiness can actually drive our success and drive our growth. Some really important, things to get your head around with regards to happiness is just not about walking around and feeling good. It's also about using that happiness to have an incredible impact. I want to show you this really interesting video by Simon Sinek. I think Simon's really good at taking really complex ideas and making them really digestible. So check it out.
If you go to the gym and you work out and you come back and you look in the mirror, you will see nothing. And if you go to the gym the next day and you come back and you look in the mirror, you will see nothing, right? So clearly there's no results, can't be measured, it must not be effective. So we quit, right? Or if you fundamentally believe that this is the right course of action and you stick with it, like in a relationship, I bought her flowers and I wished her happy birthday, and she doesn't love me. Clearly I'll give up. That's not what happens. If you believe there's something there, you commit yourself to an act of service. You commit yourself to the regime, the exercise. You can screw it up. You can eat chocolate cake one day. You can skip a day or two. It allows for that. But if you stick with it consistently, I'm not exactly sure what day, but I know you'll start getting into shape. I know it. And the same with the relationship. It's not about the events. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency. Right? You go to the dentist twice a year, your teeth will fall out. You have to brush your teeth every day for 2 minutes. What does brushing your teeth twice a day for 2 minutes do? Nothing. Unless you do it every day, twice a day for 2 minutes. Right? It's the consistency. Going to the gym for 9 hours does not get you into shape. Working out every day for 20 minutes gets you into shape. So the problem is we treat leadership with intensity. We have a 2-day offsite, we invite a bunch of speakers, we give everybody a certificate. You're a leader, right? Those things are like going to the dentist. They're very important. They're good for reminding us or getting us back on track, learning new lessons. But it's the daily practice of all the monotonous, little, boring things like brushing your teeth that matter the most.
I really like this conversation with Simon Sinek. I love that he starts out talking about how important our beliefs are and how those beliefs help us commit to those daily changes we need to make to achieve our goals. My favorite line is when he says, it's not about the events, it's not about the intensity, it's about the consistency. You see, too often, I think when we set our goals, we go at it with intensity. And, often those goals, we get to a certain point, it just peters off and we're no longer doing those things. But if we set goals and we think about how do we attack this with consistency, how do we build this into every day, how do we make this a part of who we are, that's where it becomes powerful. I took this approach when writing this chapter of this book is I wanted to give teachers a way to consistently go to work every day and build in habits and routines that they could stick with so it would have the greatest amount of impact. The funniest thing about writing this chapter is it actually had probably the greatest impact on me. I actually found writing this chapter to be very self-therapeutic. What I would do is practice each one of these 6 areas while I was writing it. These chapters would take me 3 to 4 months to write, but I was okay with that because what I was doing was reading about it, thinking about it, and trying to implement it into my life to see if it could stick. Now, I don't have a lot of time today, so I'm just going to pull out the 3 things that I've found have had the most benefit on me since writing the book. The first one is the idea of mindfulness and gratitude. And mindfulness is something I struggle with because my brain's all over the place. But what currently I'm working on is the idea of savoring, the idea of enjoying things. I look back in the past and I would just go from one thing to another and not actually stop and take that moment in. And I'm really trying to do that more and more often because of what I read during this chapter. And the one I've been really, really successful is gratitude. And, reading up on gratitude and learning more about it, I really realized how important it is. So I started trying to practice it. And I was trying different things like gratitude walks and journals, and they were all great. But I was looking for something that could stick, something that I could build in to every single day. And I found it when I started researching gratitude apps. And I thought, I really want to make my phone or my devices something that actually adds to my life, something that actually makes me happier. So when I found this app called Happy Feed, I thought it was perfect. every day at 10:10, I get this post and it says, "What are you grateful for?" And I would fill out 3 things per day. And I have to say this, as I'm really proud of this, I am currently over 500 days in a row. And I don't know many other things that I've done for 500 days in a row, and it's a new habit and it's doing a lot of benefits. You know, I've had some really tough times in the last year with my mom's health, and through those tough times, I continue to fill in my gratitude journal. And I think what it does is, even in the hard times, it gets you to focus on there are positive things going on. Although things might seem dark and might seem, sad or whatever, if you look hard enough, you can find good in every single day. And I think it's a really important thing to build into our lives. One of the most relevant things I've learned in the last 4 years, especially with the way things are going now, is the idea of positive intake, is watching my negative versus positive intake. And I'll just use media as an example. The news is a great example, that 90% of the news is negative, but it's coming at us 24/7 every single day. Before, we used to get the news at 6, 9, and noon the next day for half an hour. Now we're getting it 24/7. And not only that, it's coming to us through social media and notifications. And I'm not saying the news is bad, that we don't need to know what's going on in the world. But when I look back at the times I was struggling, I was watching a lot of news and taking a lot of negative media. I read this stat that said if you substitute 3 minutes of negative media with 3 minutes of positive media in the morning, 6 to 8 hours later, you're up to 27% happier. And so I made some changes to my morning routine to try this out. I took out looking at my phone in the morning and checking out news and replaced it with a gratitude music folder on my iPhone. And I listen to that every morning. And then when I get in the car, I'm listening to podcasts and audiobooks and really immersing myself in that positivity. And when I'm adding that positivity into my life, I'm taking away from that negativity. And I think it's really, really important, especially now, that if you are struggling or you want to find more happiness, you really think about that positive intake and find ways to replace negative intake with positive intake. It has a huge impact on the way you see the world. So the next one I want to talk about is the idea of social. And this is so important. Investing in other people is, the thing that they link the most to happiness. These relationships we're able to form. And not only that, when we think of it in terms of work, but we look at the culture we're trying to be a part of. Too often we look up at our leadership and think that that's where culture should be created. But I believe everyone should be responsible. And I do this thing that I now call random acts of recognition, which is essentially, I tried random acts of kindness and it was going good, but my completion rate was low. So I stripped it down to the basics, and I do this now. I think of when I get an authentic thought about someone, I act on it immediately in the easiest way possible. So if I'm 2 weeks from now, I'm sitting on my couch and this thought comes over me about a certain teacher, I pick up my device, I send them an email right on the spot, exactly what I was thinking. And it's had incredible impact on not only strengthening the friendships I've had, but doing it with people that I didn't know that say they did something really impressive. I used to just give them a nod and a wave and walk out the room. But now I just say, it's an authentic thought. I walk up, easiest way possible is just to tell them. Now I find myself doing it in grocery stores and everywhere I go. If I think someone's got a great personality, I just tell them. And that idea of building more recognition into every single day, it not only brings you more happiness because you feel good when you're doing it, it also impacts those relationships that you have and allows you to connect to more people. I want to finish with this, is the idea of pushing yourself to be extraordinary. I think there's so much happiness to be found in trying to take it to that next level. Going back to that first valley in my career and that idea of settling in complacency, I really think that you're not getting the most out of education. You're not getting the most out of your career. So pushing yourself and trying to get on those peaks is super important, and understanding that there's going to be valleys and there's going to be tough times, and knowing that it's how we manage those valleys and the decisions we make in those valleys and the lesson we learn in those valleys, which will help us get back onto those peaks. And we just got to believe that we can get there and just continually to work at it and continually striving to be extraordinary. Because I truly believe this, that your students deserve it. Your students deserve a teacher at the front of the room that loves to come to school and is a passionate educator. But not only that, you deserve it. You work hard, you deserve to come to school, you deserve to love it, you deserve to have a fulfilling career, you deserve to be happy. So my last message to you is make happiness a priority, not only in education, but also in your life. I hope you guys enjoy the end of the conference. Have a great day. Thank you for joining me.